Welcome to another live recording of the Nursing Home Podcast, the podcast that was created to fill a void on the internet when you're looking for information that speaks directly to nursing home operators, professionals, regulators, marketers, anyone and everyone that has anything to do with nursing homes. We are here to create content that's going to be meaningful to you. Before we even jump into today's show, just a quick shout out to Jacob Fleischer of Luxury Class Tours. We said we would give the next person who signs up to our email list a shout out. So, Jacob, shout out to you. If you want to sign up to our email list, head on over to the nursinghomepodcast.com and you will see how to do it over there. Getting straight to today's episode of the Nursing Home Podcast. Today, we are going to focus on an area of the podcast that we have not really focused on in the past, and that is the dietary part of the nursing home operations. And for that, I'd like to welcome to the show Esther Gutman. Esther Gutman, I do not have your LinkedIn profile open right here, but she is a long-term care dietitian and the founder of MNT Associates for over 15 years. So if you need somebody who knows something about this part of nursing home operations, I think we have the right person on the show today. So, Esther, welcome to the Nursing Home Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to join.
Sure. It's a pleasure having you on. And just so our listeners can learn a little bit more about who you are and how you got to doing what you do, can you give us just a brief overview of how you ended up in this company and what you guys actually do?
I'm not really sure myself how I ended up in
Happens.
this position. I'm a dietitian. I was working for a long-term care facility about 15 years ago. I was working directly for the facility, and I got approached by two other administrators, one in a long-term care facility and one in an adult. I think it was assisted living or adult medical daycare. They were desperate in survey window, completely desperate, and begged me to come on. So I said yes, and then a bit of more than I could choose. So I ended up hiring somebody to help me out and oversaw her work. And that's basically how I got started. At this point, we are contracted with adult medical daycares, assisted living, skilled nursing facilities, and primarily long-term care facilities. So that's really obviously what takes up most of our time and most of our days, the long-term care and skilled nursing facilities.
Got it. Got it. So you were thrown into the fire and you kind of got very comfortable there. And that's
Yeah.
pretty much where you're staying.
Yep.
Okay. So we know that let's start with just some of the basics and we'll get to a little bit more complex. I do want to get to how PDPM affects the dietary department specifically in the nursing home. But I want to start from an administrator's standpoint. And there's a certain tension that I want to discuss and understand it and maybe dispel it between we would call the regular nursing home staff and anyone else that is maybe more experienced, has higher professional standards. That could be nursing and rehab, certainly nursing and dietitians. And dietitians have a bad reputation, some of them.
Not
And
M&T ones. Absolutely not.
okay, so I want to get to that. So they'll come in sometimes once a week, let's say, and I know that you mentioned that by you that's not how it works, but they'll come in and they'll start giving a laundry list of all the things that weren't done. And sometimes the staff feels like they're completely disconnected from what actually goes on in the building. So these weights are still not done. And sometimes the dietitian will go off at an aide or a unit manager or a DON or whatever it is. And really, the reason why it's not done is because the scale doesn't work, or there's only one scale, or it was short staffed, and they were trying to make sure that they were fed and changed and up out of bed, and that was more important than weighing, at least from a facility standpoint, or other things. And sometimes it feels like the dietitian comes and expects like a hospital type of compliance with those types of resources, and not noticing what else is going on. And as a result, the point is, um, as a result, it does not work out the way that it should. Now, just before you go there, I'm just looking here at a technical issue. Give me 1 second because I'm looking here. It looks like it's not going on LinkedIn. So give me one moment here. Uh, Let's see if we could do this. Give me 1 second. We will definitely fix this in the edited edition, but they just gave me a notification that it was not going on LinkedIn. So let me try something right here. Give me 1 second.
You're gonna have to ask your question all over again. Okay.
Maybe. I want to make sure that we are live on LinkedIn before we continue the conversation because apparently we weren't. It is already live on Facebook and it's recording on YouTube. Give me 1 second here. See, there's people watching on Facebook, and I apologize about that. Hold on 1 second. Okay. Hold on. What we may have to do, if this is not going to work out the way that it should, honestly, I've never had this before. It says that we are live. It says that it's working. Okay, if somebody is on LinkedIn, you can let me know that it's live there. And then we will be able to proceed. Hold on. I apologize about this. It's not showing up for me. Hold on. So people are asking how can they watch it live. Give me 1 second. Let me try this one more time. Yikes, what's that? Okay. Let us see if this fixed the problem. I just did something here on my end. If that fixed the problem, great. If not, I'm actually going to stop it and redo it because it's not fair that it shouldn't be done correctly. It's so interesting. Okay. And we are live. Yep. Now it's working. Okay. Actually, so for those who are watching on Facebook, I apologize. Because I think it definitely makes sense that we should start this again from the beginning. So we will, if that's okay with you. Is it?
Sure. Yep.
Cut. Here we go. All right.
Because
yeah, exactly. Hold on. But now because we are doing this a little bit differently, we're going to switch it up. And here goes. Okay. Welcome to another live LinkedIn live recording of the Nursing Home Podcast, the only podcast that you need to go to learn more about the nursing home industry. The podcast was created to find information that is not discussed anywhere else on the internet about the nursing home industry. Before we get into today's podcast, just want to offer a quick shout out to Jacob Fleischer of Luxury Class Tours. Check out his LinkedIn profile. We mentioned last time the next one who signs up to our email list, is going to get a shout out. So go check him out. To see more about the podcast, check out our new updated website at thenursinghomepodcast.com. For today's episode, we are going to be discussing an area of the podcast an area of the nursing home industry that we have not really discussed in the past. We're going to be discussing the dietary part of the nursing home operations. This is something that maybe to the outsider, it's just food. And the main part of the nursing home is the care. And the main part of the nursing home is, the other parts, the stuff that we don't know how to do and not the dietary services. But we are going to learn today that is certainly not the case. So for that, we have Esther Gutman, a long-term care dietitian and founder of MNT Associates. For over 15 years, she's been doing this with her company and assisting nursing homes and nursing home operators in this vital part of the facility. So Esther, welcome to the Nursing Home Podcast.
Thank you. Glad to
Second
be here.
time, yes, we're glad to have you here. And as they say, second time is a charm. Little private Facebook joke there.
I think it's third time. Let's
All right.
not try that.
All right. Well, hopefully it's second time. This time will be a charm. So just before we get into the episode, I know a lot of the listeners have heard about me. They don't know who you are yet, or they don't know enough, perhaps. Can you give us the short version of how you ended up in the company that you're in? And yeah, pretty much what's your professional journey that got you to doing what you're doing right now?
Okay, so again, I apologize to those that already heard us the first time. I am a dietitian. I was working in a long-term care facility directly for the facility, and I got approached by another administrator of another long-term care facility, as well as an administrator of an assisted living or an adult daycare. And they were both desperate in survey window, begged me to come on. So I came, and of course, I bit off more than I could chew as one person. So I hired a dietitian to assist me, and that's kind of where we took off from. At this point, we are servicing long-term care facilities, skilled nursing facilities, adult medical daycares, and assisted livings. We provide dietitians to the facilities. We oversee them, train them, audit them. We're there for the facilities. Every administrator has my cell phone number. They WhatsApp me at all hours of the day and night. Of course, we have regionals and corporate staff, but I am really in touch with everything that's going on in all the buildings. And it was really just a way of streamlining our services so that we have all the dietitians in each of the buildings doing what we do at our standards.
Got it. Okay. So you were thrown into the industry, apparently. You were a dietitian before that incident that you mentioned, but once you kind of really got in and became that resource that was necessary, so then, the company grew from there. And we want to hear more about that later on in this episode. What I want to jump on first is just to dispel a couple of myths. Number one is dietary is not just food as people perceive it. As an administrator, and I'm sure you've experienced this yourself and your team, there's one area where residents, family members sometimes can give the most complaints about can be the food. And and the reason for this, and it probably may hit the kitchen staff more than your staff, because the parts that they're concerned about is more preferences and the availability of the foods that they need, maybe less the nutritional benefit of it. But there's just one thing I think that's important to point out, and I'd love to hear your take on this. The one area of service that every resident, every family member understands is food. It may be that the medications that they take, the therapy, the nursing, everything else that's going on in the facility, the maintenance, housekeeping, these may be things that they're not really familiar with. They don't really understand. They may be more critical to their thriving and surviving in the facility, but something they can't relate to as much. But food is important, and everyone gets that. And many people have made food their whole life, and they may be very skilled and may have a very discerning palate. So, is that something that you find they almost like a unfair disadvantage that the dietary department has over the other departments?
Absolutely. It's usually the number one complaint, not usually, but typically the number one complaint. It's something I'm very passionate about. I obviously I feel for these residents. They're in this building. That's one of the only things they have left to look forward to. When I in-service the staff, that's actually what I tell them. I say that's what they're looking forward to, is what they wake up in the morning and they go wheel themselves over to where the menu is posted to see what's for breakfast, lunch, and dinner and what the alternate is. And that's really all they have to look forward to, many of them. So it's very, very vital, besides for obviously all the dangerous aspects that may occur where they may obviously have a tray inaccuracy and get a piece of toast or a piece of chicken when they're on a ground or puree diet. But just from the standard of living aspect and from the quality of life aspect, it's probably the most important thing. And like you said, that's really all that they see. They know they get medications, but they don't really care which one it is. They very much so, they get all bent out of shape. It's not unlikely that I walk into a room and they'll hand me they'll hand me their diet slip and start showing me, hey, it said I was getting mashed potatoes and I got rice. They literally will take notes on it and hand it to me. So wow. It's obviously something I'm very passionate about. And quite frankly, they should get what they're ordering and what they are asking for. And their coffee should be hot and their hot cereal should be hot. You and I would not be happy if we had cold coffee in the morning. So, it's something I love food. Most people love food. It's something we all look forward to. And the hot food should be hot. The cold food should be cold. They should get what they asked for. And yes, it's something I am quite passionate about, which is what brought me to start my sister company. So, I got frustrated to the point that we started a sister company to try to bring our standards to the kitchen as well, and not just on the clinical side. But there was one time that I actually went into a room, and it was like the third day. I happened to have been in a building all week because there was some other things going on. And this guy was just complaining, all I want is Cheerios, and he couldn't get Cheerios. So I actually walked down to the kitchen and brought him up a couple of Cheerios, a couple of, those little individual sized Cheerios, and put a whole bunch in his room because I just wanted to know that he was going to get them when I wasn't there. So yes, it is a problem, and it's something that we're constantly, we do take a part in that as well. We try very much to.
So but then nursing probably went into the room and took them away because of the mice problem and because of they're not supposed to have food in their rooms. Now sometimes they're not taking into account. I know
they were closed.
But they're 100%. But sometimes, so let's get right into this. Let's have.
Well, 3 days in a row, if they missed the Cheerios on the breakfast tray, then I was going to the kitchen to get it for him.
Exactly, regardless, because they had enough time to figure it out themselves. So this is something that I know we mentioned before. There's sometimes we feel that when there's outside professionals that come into the building, they see their piece. So like what you said is 100% true. This is almost like how operators or administrators feel when the Department of Public Health comes in for their survey and they're checking the heat of the coffee, which, by the way, you get dinged both ways. If it's too hot, it's too dangerous. If it's too cold, it's not fair because they're supposed to have hot food. So you have to get the exact temperature, and there are like a gazillion, and that's an exact number, variables of the reasons why that could not be the case. Because it leaves, being, as you know, and as many people listening know, but let's just speak it out, leaves the kitchen from whatever the heat source is, goes into something that's hopefully insulated. Maybe it's already out in cups, which the temperature is decreasing very quickly. And then it has to make it all the way up to the room. And then the trays have to be passed in a timely fashion. And there's just so many things that have to go right for that to happen. And as you know, like you mentioned, like you bit off more than you can chew. And you spend a lot of time in nursing homes. Almost every day is a crisis from one day or from one reason or another. Either missing equipment, missing staffing, DPH is in the building, there's a fire in the building literally, or just a fire drill, or something is going on. There's an in-service, and people are pulled off the floor for short periods of time. And for all that to happen correctly, it can be very challenging. Now, you're 100% right. It should happen anyway. And if you are a facility, you're accepting responsibility to do things correctly. Do you think that the typical dietitian, your own company excluded, understands the surrounding that they're working in and includes that in the way that they relate to the people that actually need to do the work? Or do you experience this disconnect? And I'll add one more point. How do you address that with your team?
Okay, so there definitely is a disconnect. I think, I'll walk into a building every time I take over a new account and I'll see orders that are so impossible. They'd be very nice for individualized care for that resident, but quite frankly, you have to take reality into effect. So you're not going to give something at the most bizarre time on a shift change or some crazy specific order that we all know is not going to happen. So I could speak for our dietitians. Obviously, we do. I do agree with you that there is a disconnect where I think every dietitian should go down to the kitchen at least once a month and watch what actually goes on the tray line. They should see what they have to do, the fast-paced environment, how fast they have to get all those trays out, the chop, the ground, the puree, the special orders, the always available, the calls coming in, but they don't want this and they do want this, and the reality of what goes on. So I think that every dietitian should spend a little bit of time in the kitchen, and that would actually really help them understand what goes on. To answer for our dietitian, we very much so, we give that as part of our orientation and part of our training is we very much focus on the reality as well. Yes, you're right. And ideally it would be so wonderful if we could do this, this, and this, but just taking into account what realistically might be, doable in the nursing home environment with the staffing limitations, with whatever other limitations are going on in different buildings. All that being said, I definitely do encourage them to be a team player. And most of our dietitians, I have to say, hands down, 99% of them would they walk into a room and someone doesn't have something, they'll walk down to the kitchen and get it themselves. They don't just call down and say, hey, oh, bring up this and this for, Mrs. Smith and 100A. They definitely will walk themselves down there, walk up to the nursing car, get them a straw, get them a spoon, get the missing health shake, and actually bring that to help out the staff.
Right. Amazing. And I think we both know that that's not always the case. Sometimes it'll be like you just said, the dietitian is going to walk in there in the middle of a crisis, and sometimes the staff may not barely even notice that they're there. Like, how come this is not done? And call down to the kitchen, and because there is a disconnect, then people, even though they're right, and even though we want their services and pay for their services, from an operation standpoint, it's difficult to accept even correct information if it's presented in a way that better than thou type of way. And like you said, if you're going to have the dietitian say, I understand that it's busy, let me run down and get it, even though the dietitian may have to go to multiple buildings that day, and the nursing home staff doesn't get the dietitian world either, but really bridging that gap is critical for them for it to work properly. I'll add one more point. It's not just going down to the kitchen. That's a quick fix, and that's amazing if they can do that. But even when you're in the conference room, boardroom, whatever you call it, and you're having the meetings, a coffee meeting or whatever it is, the dietitian is a key component. One of the best trained and skilled professionals in the room. It can offer quite a bit if, when she walks out of the room or he walks out of the room, they're not talking about this person who came in. And I'm not that this ever happens, of course, right? But if they're really teammates and they're really on the same team, then they say, you know what? From a dietary standpoint, this is critical that this happens. I get it, that it's a challenge to be done here. What do you think we can do to address this problem? Instead of coming in every week, it's still not done, without getting to the root of the problem. I mean, what are your thoughts about that?
Are you referring to weights, or you're just referring to in general how things?
I was alluding to weights, but let's talk specifically about weights. How do your dietitians, or even just in general, I know it's like a pain point. It's so critical to be done, and the facility staff have a hard time getting it done. Why does that happen, and how can any dietitian help make it, not just to monitor the process, but actually solve the problem and work with the facility to get it done?
Okay, so this is the $1 million question in this industry. I always joke around that if I could, invent some sort of device like an ear thermometer that will take weights, I'd be a millionaire, probably a billionaire. I don't.
Let's talk afterwards. Maybe we can figure something out.
I don't fully understand why it's such a struggle, but I think the reason why it is such a struggle is, like you said before, they need to get changed. The CNAs, very often they're short-staffed, especially now since COVID. I would say in the last year, the staffing shortages have been more extreme. But like you said, they need to get fed, they need to get taken to the bathroom. All those things will take precedence over getting a weight, and they should take precedence. Even though I want my weights, I'm still saying that. Obviously, the people have to be cared for, they have to be fed, their food needs to be open. All these things have to happen. So that's the reality. Weights also still have to happen, as you mentioned before. They are regulatory, for regulatory purposes, for monitoring the residents, for MDS purposes, for PDPM purposes. We all know we need to get the weights, but at the same time, we need to be team players. So I think we touched on this last time we spoke, but I personally believe that personality and attitude is 75% of your dietitian success. Yes, they need their clinical skills. Yes, their clinical skills need to be, they need to be up to par. And yes, their documentation needs to be okay for when a surveyor is reviewing them. But on a day-to-day running of the facility, the dietitians who have a pleasant personality, who are a team player, who are not better than that, who will roll up their sleeves and wheel the wheelchair over to the scale to actually get, we can't lift people, which is definitely hard for us. So we would, but a lot of my dietitians will take the residents that walk and walk them over to the standing scale. Or once the CNA got that weight with the wheelchair, they'll take the empty wheelchair and get that in deductive for them. But a lot of it is, like you said, being a team player, establishing a rapport. If you ask the CNA how they're doing, how their child is, how their weekend was, what their plans are, anything like that, if you develop a rapport, if you treat them like a person, most likely, they will want to work with you and you say, hey, come with me, let's go over to the scale, let's just knock all these weekly weights out. And very often if you address them that way and you treat them like a person and you work with the facility staff and, like I said, primarily the CNAs, you usually get what you need done.
Let me add one more point. I think part of the underlying reason why this is such a struggle is because the facility staff don't really believe that it's so critical.
Yeah. That's absolutely true. I think I think by now most of our buildings kind of realize how much we do, but I think when we first come in, they kind of view you as a glorified waitress, who takes food preferences, and they don't realize how big of a part you take in the clinical team. As a whole, dietitians are extremely detailed and extremely anal. It's one of our character traits. So we do pick up on all sorts of things. It's not unusual that, I'll go into a chart and see that there was an abnormal TSH that was through the roof that nobody addressed.
TSH is what?
Thyroid panel. The TSH is the thyroid stimulating hormone, but I'm saying very often, when there's a large weight loss or weight gain that doesn't seem to come from anywhere else, nothing else has changed. If the TSH is high or low and they need their Synthroid or levothyroxine adjusted, very often that will, cause a weight loss or gain that is, that kind of makes sense of it. But I'm saying it's not unusual for us to find things like that or to walk into a room and see, we don't just stick to our domain. Like if I walk into a room and I see a tube feeding lying flat, we say something, not just when I say it's not just me, it's my team. So we definitely, I do think that as a whole, thank God we don't really deal with that. I think that most of them do realize our importance and realize how much we do. They see that we do a lot more than just the food and just getting the weights.
So let's just zoom out from your team for a moment. And I think, and you could disagree, I would love if you disagree, unless you happen to agree, that the facility staff sometimes may see the dietitians as regulatory compliance. Like we have Department of Public Health. These are people out in a simplistic way. These are people who don't work. They're not on the same payroll, and they're there to enforce and ensure that certain things are just done. And then we have other professionals that come in. It might be the rehab team. It might be the medical director, and it might be the dietitian, or anybody else who comes in and they're not part of our world, and they're not here at 2:00 in the morning when the fire alarm is on, and they just come in the middle of the day, and their job is to make sure that we did our job. Who are they to tell us what to do? Don't they realize that we walked here in the snow for 5 miles? We stayed overnight. We purchased things for the residents out of our own money. We know these residents really well, which many of them do. And we're involved in life-saving day-to-day skills. So we are making sure that they're eating every single day. Well, hopefully, right? We are making sure that they're out of bed. We are making sure that there's nothing obvious going on. There's no change of condition. So yes, weights are important, maybe. So first of all, do they really understand that it's important? And do they understand that it's not I guess the teamwork element, that we're here together on the same side of the table and the resident is on the table, so to speak, and we're here to figure out how to best care for this human being. I think all of that plays into it, because the feedback that I hear from the facility standpoint is they're coming in here, they want the weights. Do they have any clue what's going on here? So I don't want to overstress the point, but I think it's important that it's not just the professional versus the non-professionals. I guess understanding someone's a dietitian, not just working in any town USA today, comes into nursing homes, has this problem that she can't get the facility staff to comply. She's tried to be nice. She tries her once a week to bring donuts to the department heads, and they end up going to the residents or whatever happens to them. And whatever she does, she tries to be nice. It doesn't work. She tries to be tough. It doesn't work. Do you think some of these things could work? And what other tips would you give the dietitians that might be listening to this for them to be successful, with their teams? Then I want to move on to something else.
Okay. First of all, my tips for dietitians or for administrators is have a weight meeting every week. It could be quick. It could be right after morning meeting. But when you have the DON there and the unit manager sitting in on a meeting and they say, oh, last week she was 200 pounds and this week she's 179 and the reweight was 159, they're all jumping out of their chairs if they care about the residents because they're going, oh my gosh, that makes no sense. So you do it as a team approach, and it's definitely, it makes it everybody's problem, not just your problem. And then I'm going to jump to PDPM, but now PDPM was actually a humongous gift for us because
that's where I wanted to go, by the way, next.
Now that we have, okay, well, I'll jump there for you. Now that we have PDPM, we actually have the MDS coordinators, sharing in our pain. If we have a missing weight on Section K, it affects reimbursement. So, if nobody wants to quote unnecessary weight losses just because they got that 159 when we know that the resident looks exactly the same as she did last week. So, we kind of have this as a team approach, and the way to get the whole team to care about your weights and to care about your resident and say, oh my gosh, and share in your pain, quote unquote, is if you have a meeting like that, and it could be really quick. It could be, 10 minutes after morning meeting, the unit managers, the DON, the administrator is usually there. And just running through them and saying, oh, she lost 5 pounds. Okay, that makes sense. She's not eating anything. This is what we're doing for her. She lost 20 pounds. Oh my gosh, that is because she had a huge increase in her Lasix. Makes sense. And then you talk about someone who it's not even possible and the weights make no sense. And then it's kind of when that's successful, really the unit manager herself is going to jump out of her chair and say, I'm going to get a weight in her right now. That makes no sense, because she's feeling in your pain and she sees your frustration, and she sees that this is not just the dietitian's job or the dietitian versus the rest of the team. It's the whole team. And I think I started telling you about that last time as well. I really, as much as our dietitians are, wearing their black M&T lab coats and officially get paid from us, they really are an integral part of the team. I would say, like I said, 99% of them have sunny personalities, are fresh and eager and very much, team player, work very well with the team, have great personalities. As much as I don't want them chit-chatting and coffee clutching all day long, I do encourage them, like I said, to establish a rapport, to get to know, what their families are like. And, they are extremely well liked in their facility, thank God. And, for the most part, I do feel like the nursing staff, I don't want to disagree with you, but for the most part, I do feel that the nursing staff does understand all that we do. They'll call us and page us multiple times a day. Because they know that we take care of things also. That's, they know that we'll call the family member when there's a weight loss. We'll, be present. They get very excited when the weight makes sense. And we actually also really help with, like I said, with being a team player. It's to both of our benefits, but in almost all of our buildings, we are the ones entering all the weights into PCC. So, we kind of review them as we put them in. If they make no sense, we don't put them in. We asked for a list of reweights, and that's also really helping out the staff. Most of our buildings, we enter our orders directly into PCC, again, really helping out the nursing staff. And we like doing it because we know that it's accurate. So we do, I think, show them in multiple ways that we really are trying to work with them, trying to help them, and not just walking in and barking orders to get weights.
Now, just to zoom out of that for a minute, first of all, thank you for that. That was very helpful. And understanding that's also could be a best practice. So if you're a dietitian and you're challenged with this, so instead of having the facility staff putting in the weight, so then you coming and questioning it, you should be part of the process of gathering the information and getting on it right away if it doesn't make sense. But just you mentioned in passing, PDPM has affected a lot of different ways that we operate in the nursing home. How did PDPM make the weights, the importance of the weights, that much more important that the MDS coordinator is now on your team?
Okay, I mean, we're all working.
I knew I was going to push a button.
we all know PDPM is like a crazy word. It was crazy when it first rolled out, but at this point, it's just part of what we do. We actually have our own PDPM coordinator in our home office, and she audits all of the accounts every week just to make sure that we are maximizing on reimbursement for all of our facilities. So from a malnutrition, risk for malnutrition, she's kind of looking at all that and making sure that everybody is properly coded. For those of you who are listening who may not be aware of this, when someone's at risk for malnutrition or has an actual diagnosis of malnutrition, that actually increases reimbursement for the facility. Same, if they're on a mechanically altered diet, and most of the reimbursement that we look at is if they're on IV fluids in the last 7 days. So right when we get our new admissions, if we get 5, 6, 7 admissions that day, the first thing we do pretty much is run through them and see who might have been on IV fluids, because that's 7 NTA points, 7 points for PDPM. So that's actually a huge money making proposition. And we would never want to miss that. So we do communicate that right away with our MDS coordinators, and some of our buildings, MDS coordinators actually first communicate that to us, depending on, I guess, how strong the MDS coordinator is in a building. But as from a weight standpoint, as I mentioned before, if we don't have a weight, it affects the reimbursement. It will come up like an error message if you're missing a weight. So, in most buildings, I guess at a certain point, we'll get a lot of, refusals. And I always say there's not 10 people that refuse their monthly weights, refusal
Staff
means
refusals.
Exactly. Staff refusals, staff not in the mood. So at what I mean by having the MDS coordinator on my team is that, we don't just take that. We, first of all, refusal means refusal times 3. You have to try 3 different times. If they're tired one day, try the next morning. And then if they're due for quarterly, we very much so try. We'll go into the room ourselves, and we'll, even if it's a frequent refuser, we'll walk in ourselves and just explain to them the importance and try to coax them to get it at least once a quarter. So, and we have the MDS coordinator rooting behind us, whether it's at morning meeting or if it's, just whatever interdisciplinary meetings are going on that are discussing this.
So in simple terms, since the implementation of PDPM, weights directly impact, they weigh more into the reimbursement. So whereas in the past it didn't affect it as dramatically, now it really does. So if you're not capturing a weight loss, a weight gain, or other conditions that may be signaled or identified based on these types of things, then the MDS coordinator is not going to be able to do what she needs to do for the facility. And I hate when people, as soon as you say the reimbursement and clinical in the same sentence, people get like, oh, that's just money and we're here to provide care. The beauty that PDPM did is that it's trying to align care and reimbursement, that the right things that are the right things to do for the patient are what you're going to get reimbursed for. So you don't take a hospice patient and give them aggressive therapy because there is no other way to cover their costs. Obviously exaggerating a little bit, but not completely. So someone that should, obviously not someone who's actually on hospice, someone that's hospice eligible. So the point is, now you can provide for the patient exactly what they need and get reimbursed appropriately, provided that you're documenting appropriately. So whereas in the past, maybe this wasn't as important, now it certainly is. I'm just seeing the time here, and
I'm just going to interrupt you just to clarify one thing. Weight losses have always been a concern, and weight losses have always been something that we didn't want to code if it was not correct. Meaning, if they looked exactly the same as they did upon admission and shows that they lost 20 pounds, we would get we'd get a reweigh. We'd speak to them about their usual body weight. Weight losses were always something that we did not want to code unnecessarily, and that and yes, of course, we always cared about our residents. So if there's a weight loss, it's not just about that we don't want to code it. We want to, intervene appropriately.
Of course.
Yeah.
But my point only was the reason why the MDS coordinator is on your team is because this directly impacts their responsibility, which is to capture the care and to get reimbursed for the care. Of course, this was always an issue. The biggest proof is that you're in business for 15 years. And I think PDPM was not in effect 15 years ago.
Right.
It was still important, all these services. Before we wrap up here, any final thoughts for dietitians struggling to work with facilities trying to understand the role of dietitians? Before we wrap up today, any final words?
So kind of just recapping a little bit of what I said, where we definitely are one of the more detailed people on the team, usually, quite frankly. So we do capture things that are not necessarily in our official, quote unquote job description. But dietitians are a very integral part of the team. And if you have a good one, then you know it, and you know that she's a good part, a very good dietitian and an integral part of the team. But like I said, I think the personality, the attitude, developing a rapport with the team players, developing a rapport with the CNAs, with the nursing staff, being a team player and doing things that are not, quote unquote, in your official job description. Go to the kitchen, get the food preference, go get the weight if they walk to the scale. Take the wheelchair weight, be a team player and don't just, kind of be with them in their amount of work that they have to do. Just be with them and help do what you can do.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. If people want to learn more about you, about your company, where's the best place to send them?
Okay, they could check out our website. It's mntassociatesnj.com.
Mhm.
Even though we're not just in New Jersey anymore.
Okay.
If they want to reach me directly, they can email me at esther@mntassociates.com. That's ESTHER@mntassociates.com. And they can message me on LinkedIn.
Okay. Amazing. I mean, we'll put all the contact information in the show notes, which will be available at the nursinghomepodcast.com and everywhere else where you consume podcasts, whether it's on Apple or Google or Stitcher or anywhere else, really. And if you ever are on any podcast directly and you don't see the Nursing Home Podcast, message me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty sure we're everywhere by now, but if you find somewhere, there's always these new directories that are popping up. We just put it in India this week. We put it in other places too because they have their own system. But if you find anything, then you certainly should message me. To listen to this episode and all past and future episodes of the Nursing Home Podcast, you can head on over to the new website, which is the nursinghomepodcast.com, or anywhere else where you consume your podcast. Esther, thank you very much for coming on the show. We appreciate the information that you've shared and learning more about you and your company. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting